Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. My call sign is Blitz, and today we're having a look at the conflict, well, why would I say conflict? War, all-out war in Ukraine. You know, the Russians invaded. Nobody thought that was going to happen, even though they had 150,000 troops massed outside the border. I didn't even think it was going to happen, but boom, he goes and does it. It's crazy, right? And absolutely terrible and tragic for the people of Ukraine and the destruction that's brought upon their beautiful country. Yet again. But I think outside of all of this tragedy, there's some important lessons that we can learn regarding urban survival in a war zone. So let's try to keep the politics, propaganda, hype, fake news out of the conversation, and let's stick with the facts, be objective as possible. And I think there's definitely some awesome lessons that we're going to learn from this. And we're basically going to ask a question. Your home is in the path of the invading forces. What do? Do you stay or do you leave? And what are the ramifications of that? And then after we have that conversation, I'm going to share with you guys an interview I had with two people. One guy who's in Kyiv, hunkered down, and the other guy in Russia, their take on the situation, and a quick talk with them about their preparations and things they may or might have done differently if they had more advanced warning. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So let's go ahead and explore these two avenues, these two paths that you would be presented with. But we'll have to use our imagination and simply really just imagine that your home is in the path of the invasion. Maybe you live in Kyiv, Mariupol, or really at this point, any large strategic target. Speaking of targets, now you're the target for what is called mass fire offensive strategies. And what's that, you say? Well, it's nothing really, just the concentrated use of artillery, rocket artillery, and large tank units for extra spicy fun. So imagine World War II carpet bombing, but without the planes. So at this point, you are faced with two paths, right? Very simple. You can either hunker down or burn rubber. Okay, so you have chosen to remain in place. What's the first advantage that you can think of? Well, obviously, first thing that came to mind for me was now I can defend my property from looters and bandits. Second advantage, depending on how you look at it, you can grab the battle rattle and engage in glorious combat against the invading pigs. And maybe in the process you get smoked, right? Which I guess, depending on your life goals, might be fine. That's your call. However, if we step back for a moment and we ignore patriotic duty to defend your country and your little square bit of planet Earth, then hunkering down in survival mode makes the most sense. I guess you would board up the windows, try to fortify your home as much as possible, have somewhere safe to hide and shelter from incoming artillery, do the best you can and brace for impact, because there's no way to really prepare for something like this, right? I guess you can just hopefully look around and say, okay, well, hopefully I got water, food, cash, and related supplies on hand. And that's it. You don't know how long this is going to last. You don't know if they're going to sweep by you. You don't know if it's going to turn into a siege. Look what's happening in Ukraine right now. As Russian forces get closer to the outskirts of Kyiv, everybody's starting to say this could turn into a siege situation. And do you have enough supplies to survive that and all the barbarity and tragedy that goes into an urban type of siege? Think about Bosnia, for example, or Chechnya. So what are the disadvantages that you have here? Well, any horror that modern warfare can bring to bear. Think about all the different weapons it use. Think about the raping and pillaging and murder and looting and everything that happens inside the context and chaos of a war zone. You know, let's say you're sheltered in place and you got everything you need and you feel good. Well, what happens when tanks show up on your street and there's open combat right outside your front door? There's nowhere to go at that point in time. The roads are blocked. Airstrikes and artillery are probably constant, which would prevent you from having any sort of freedom of movement. And then you run out of supplies, and then a tank shell hits your house and takes you out of your misery, right? So, not a pretty picture there. Either path is really not too great. So, let's move on to the next option. Okay, so you have chosen to evacuate, which does seem wise considering the downsides of remaining in place. This decision is logical if A, you are focused solely on your own survival and that's it, and living to fight another day maybe, right? Or you're responsible for ensuring the safety of others. Like, myself, I'm a family man, right? So I'm responsible for ensuring the safety of my family. So evacuation, let's talk what advantages you might have here. So first off, obvious advantage is the odds of your survival and you living increased big time by going in the opposite direction of the violence. And then another advantage, I guess, here would be to, if you did have an evac prep and plan, hopefully you do, you wouldn't leave without one, or if you were forced to, but this would be an opportunity to execute that strategy in real life, and then obviously the learning experiences that come from that. That's all I can really think of in terms of advantages, right? The situation still sucks. So let's talk about the disadvantages, and there's definitely a few. Think about this. Your vehicle could break down. You could be in a convoy of vehicles stretching 20, 30 miles down the road, and you could be targeted by airstrikes, helicopters, artillery, accidental or not. You could get stuck in the middle of an all-out pitched battle. Let's say you get to the border and you can't get out for whatever reason. Now you have nowhere to turn, and you wind up as a refugee, and you can't go back home because your home is probably gone. So what do? What's the best move here, guys? Maybe it's a hybrid approach. Because let's be honest, remaining in place or leaving, either path really does suck. Okay, so here's my take on it, which does hinge on a few key factors, some of which I'm going to list up here. I'm going to need to ensure that I have a reliable vehicle. I need to ensure that I have fuel. I need to have a destination in mind. I need to have supplies with me. And you get the general idea, right? Now, if it was my call and I was in this situation and I had the ability to do all those things, and I had all those things, I would vote to leave, and well in advance, like maybe a few weeks in advance. Now, maybe we all have this ideal heroic view of ourselves, since I know the majority of the audience here is men, right? So here's my heroic view of myself. After I secure the family at a safe house, I come back with my boys to the front, we join in the resistance, and we drive the hordes of orcs from the homeland until a future is secure for my nation and people. And everybody lives happily ever after. That sounds great, right? Okay, now let's move on to the Q&A, which was an incredible opportunity to get the report direct from the source with no filters applied. Here you're going to see two different chats. We're going to start with my friend in Russia, and you're going to see the questions I ask him, and then I ask the same set of questions to his brother, who is currently in Kyiv. Now, I've left these responses unedited from the translation in English to bring it as raw and uncut as possible, right? Now, from what I know, Ukrainians, Russians, and I think just human beings in general simply want to live in peace and enjoy basic freedom, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're probably not like super hyper interested in restoring the former glory of a nation, or rewriting history, or changing borders, or invading neighboring countries. They simply want to, probably number one, not be oppressed, and number two, probably not wake up at 5 a.m. to artillery grad bombardment. So here from my friend in Russia, I asked, are you surprised by the conflict? And his response is the same, as you can see, as a lot of people. Nobody thought Putin was really going to push the button. And for people who live in Russia, they know Putin on a completely different level than we do. And they were even surprised, right? So there's that. Now, I asked him, what could you maybe do to be better prepared? Or what mistakes did you make in the context of your preps? And of course, the reasonable answer, he says here, how do you prepare for something like this? Maybe not live in Russia, and he talks about, needing more dollars, and the ruble is dead, right? And this was a few days ago. Now the ruble is definitely dead. I think it's worth about a penny. Now, one mistake, he said that he did not remove enough money at once. Now, the other question I thought would be interesting to know is, how well is the average citizen prepared? And the answer he provides is kind of applicable globally, right? Because, he's talking about an older guard here and a younger guard. The older guard still believes the old USSR propaganda and blaming Russia for all the problems, right? And so they're kind of with Putin on this one. But the younger generation is not, right? So, he says here, therefore families are now split. The adult generation, further before in poverty, also wants to continue to live in poverty, and their children and die with hunger, right? So the whole context of the situation over in Russia as an average citizen just sounds awful, basically. And this is just some context of conversations I've had with this person over a period of time, right? Now, the same set of questions to his brother on the ground in Kyiv. Now, just like his brother, he was surprised too. He wakes up at 5 a.m. from bombardment. Nobody thought Putin would go for it. I didn't think that. I just expected that he would recognize those rebel areas. Ukraine might throw a fit about it. He'd have some troops there ready to exact his will if Ukraine didn't want to go along with it, and I thought that was it, and he thought the same. Pretty much everybody did, Now, about being better prepared, he was apparently accidentally already prepared by what he says here. He had the cash, the food, and the water beforehand. Maybe in the future he could have more long-term food preps in place. So that makes sense, right? And then, this question here, how is the average citizen prepared? Obviously Ukraine has a long history and a tragic history in some cases. They had World War II and they had the Soviets. So that taught them to make long-term food savings for, as he says here, quote unquote, a black day. And now, two questions, of course, I had to ask him because he chose to stay in Kyiv. I asked, why did you stay instead of evacuate? And just like the things we had discussed about, no car, and he couldn't get out immediately. And then later on, he sees that there's resistance, right? And the Ukrainians will fight back. So maybe he feels a little bit better now. And the other thing I wanted to ask, which I was kind of surprised by, was that there's still cell and internet functional service across Ukraine, and his response was, I guess, that the Russians just haven't targeted these stations. There's probably tons of them, and that wasn't the main intent of their mission. So in the future, guys, I hope to have more and more of these Q&As. Maybe this is something that we can do and kind of learn more and cut through all the propaganda filters, and at least hear from the people who are living through this day to day. So there you have it, guys. If you're looking for more information on this conflict, our Telegram channel is covering as much as we can and sharing some interesting content that you might not find anywhere else. So make sure you go down there in the pinned comment, check out the Telegram channel. There's also a link to subscribe to our newsletter, which is also putting out a ton of great information about this conflict and then other topics related to survival. So you're going to want to check that out. And if you haven't done so already, can you hit that subscribe button real quick for me? I appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for the support. And if you guys are over there in Europe, my prayers go out to you. Please stay safe out there, guys. Let's pray for a soon end to this conflict so people's lives can get rebuilt and get back to normal.